let's get going. Cool. So I think first off, I think a few of you maybe join the kind of liquid webinar part 1 piece, which I did with Sorsha. And hopefully those of you who didn't have been able to see the video recording, because a lot of what we touched on there will be kind of furthering on. But for this week, I brought in a couple of my colleagues, Dana and Brian, who are able to kind of help us go that little bit further. So first I'll introduce myself and then I'll pass on to them. But my name's Ollie. I'm a senior enterprise account manager based in London. I was previously a NationBuilder customer, and learning more and more every day, including a lot of the stuff that we're sharing today, which is relatively new to me, to be honest. And yeah, keen to muck in. And we also have Dana.
Awesome. Hey, everybody. Yeah, as Ollie mentioned, my name is Dana. I'm a senior account manager here at NationBuilder. I've been here for about 2.5 years. And I have a background primarily at other software companies. So coming at it from a little bit of a different perspective, and excited to share more about using Liquid for fundraising.
Yeah, and my name's Brian. I am based in Detroit. I've been at NationBuilder for 7 years. I'm our partner integrations manager. I previously had a background in politics, but at NationBuilder, I've really dove into the technical side of all things NationBuilder.
That is probably an understatement, but yeah, that definitely covers it. Cool. So I'm not going to dwell on this too much, because I think kind of by definition of being here, you probably have a pretty good idea what NationBuilder is. But the quick answer is it does all of these lovely things that you can see on the screen. And for anyone who wants to learn more about that, then please do. You've got my email, so please do reply to my email, and I can share more about that. But in terms of what we're going to be looking at today, so we're going to recap around why are we talking about personalization? Why is it important? Why is it relevant? And how can it help you? That will include looking a little bit back on what we did already, but we're going to be going over that quite quickly, so we have some time to look more at advanced personalization, both in emails and on websites. And then we'll finish off with a nice Q&A. So let me get going in terms of the importance of personalization. So as many of you know who have kind of attended various webinars over the last few weeks, we've been sharing lots of information to help power end-of-year fundraising pushes. So I think it was 2 weeks ago, we had Sorsha and Ashley sharing the who, the why, defining goals, how you go about it. And then we also, before that, did the kind of personalization part 1 that looked at some ways of utilizing Liquid to get your message across. Today, we're going to be going deeper still and looking at some advanced usage of Liquid with which to use in your fundraising emails on your web pages that are ultimately going to help you to optimize that fundraising even further and ensure that you are getting every final penny or cent wherever you are in the world, which is obviously all too crucial for the work that you're doing. Okay, so before we get into those and the specifics, I want to recap on some of the items that we have touched upon and ground ourselves in why personalize. So first thing is, we all know that there is lots of noise and traffic, especially at this time of year. And that breaking that down a bit, that can be, a noisy time for all inboxes. So let's say that each nonprofit is said to send an average of 5 emails a month. Obviously, that's going to vary a little bit. In the UK, it might be less. In the US, probably more. And then come December, that massively ramps up. You've got 31% of annual giving taking place. 12% of that is happening in the last 3 days of the year. So let's say each organization is sending, say, 10 emails in December, and some will be more, then you're starting to get quite busy. Now, in my personal email, I pride myself in having a pretty clean inbox. I only subscribe to those issues that I genuinely care about, and I unsubscribe to those that I don't. So I probably still have around, I don't know, say 8 fundraising charities and causes that I genuinely care about, want to continue to receive their content. Whereas many people will have probably 5 times that amount or 10 times that amount. So let's say I have 60 to 80 fundraising emails coming into my inbox in December, which is a relatively, conservative amount, small c conservative amount. That is already a lot of traffic and noise to cut through. So you're going to be competing probably amongst each other to an extent, I'm afraid, and for the same supporters. And what's more, each year your supporters are going to have higher and higher expectations of what to expect, as they, like me, get more protective over their inboxes. And so it is crucial to keep their attention and make sure their donation experience feels tailored and relevant to them, more so to your organization than to any of the other causes that are asking for their donations. And so that's where personalization comes in. The more personalized their experience, the more bonded they're going to feel to your cause and therefore more likely to take action. So that might all sound a little bit stressful. There's a lot of traffic, a lot of busyness going on. You've got lots of competition. Honestly, that is the truth. But there is some good news, and that is that there are tried and tested ways that you can come out on top, and personalization is really key to a lot of that. So, and you don't actually need to just take my word for it. So in a study completed by HubSpot and Experian, it was found that personalized emails have 29% higher unique open rates, 21% higher click rates. The calls to action perform 202% better than those calls to action that are not personalized. And personalized emails generate 6 times higher transactions. The other piece of good news, according to Salesforce research, is that nearly half of emails get sent out don't even mention the name of the supporter, the recipient, the potential donor, whoever it is, let alone make use of more powerful personalization like what we're going to be looking at. And the best news of all is NationBuilder, you have an ideal tool. You have an integrated email website talking to each other, giving you the relevant data so you can personalize, ensure a fantastic user experience, and help you to stand out from the crowd, as this tree in the image is doing. And ultimately make sure that your organization is winning the battle for end of year donations. What does that actually look like? And what tools should you be using at what points? So I think there are kind of 4 points that we're going to be looking at and you should be thinking about, which are getting your email open, reading the email and getting your links clicked, asking for the right amount to maximize your income, and then to get the donation processed. So I'm just going to go through each of those and think about some tactics that lend to each of those, and then Brian and Dana are going to jump in a little bit more and talk in some of the kind of more specifics. So first off, getting your emails opened. So I think the first thing is you're going to want to have good email deliverability. Any customer I work with as an EAM, Simone, I'll call you out, will be sick to death of me talking about this, but unless you have a good email reputation, you're not even going to land in the inbox, maybe not even in the spam box, and you might as well not even get out of bed and start the whole process. We've got tons of resources on email deliverability, webinars on this subject. We're not going to talk too much about it today, but please do have a look, because unless you've got that sorted, you're not going anywhere. The next piece is, and Ashley talked about this a bit last week, but you need to be considering carefully who that audience is, and who you are targeting for these emails. Then comes the kind of the personalization side of things. So your subject lines and your preview lines are going to be crucial here. So first off, consider including the name in your subject line. So here's an example of where that's been done. Readers are 26% more likely to open an email if their name is in it. And we looked at how to do that last time in this example on the screen. And you could even go further, include more specific information about the users. So you could say, Oliver, can you donate another however many pounds for our end of year giving campaign? And you could do that in the preview text as well. And then when building out your subject line, you should also consider creating urgency, asking questions, or creating intrigue as well. And you can also, of course, A/B and test the subject lines and send and senders using your NationBuilder tools. So let's say that you've achieved step 1, they've opened the email, hopefully, and now you actually want them to read it. You want to make sure that the content is standing out. So last time we looked at how you can display data from their records in the email, whether that's using smart fields to display a last donation amount, as in this example, or using some liquid to show kind of total amount, or the amounts that display average donation amount within this, as we displayed last time. We also looked at how you can use liquid if-else logic to surface different content. So maybe that's different blocks of content depending on language, depending on their geography, depending on their donation history, or it could even be kind of header photos that are relating to issues that you know people care about. Again, yeah, all of this was shared last time. We've got full documentation and a guide on it as well. But this is where you can really start to make the case for why they should be donating to you over others, because you have that personal kind of direct relationship with them, and get them to click the link and then ultimately make that donation. Excuse me, I'm nursing a bit of a cough. One of the worst experiences for a donor is when they've donated time and time again to you, but they received the same message that they might have got if they were a first-time donor. So you can use the above tactics to make sure that you personalize your message depending on someone's donation history. We'll also shortly be looking at some tricks on how you can go even deeper into sharing information on their donation history to make it clear how much you value their donation and how important it is, which in turn will encourage them to donate again. So again, on the screen, and Dana is going to be looking at an example a bit like this as well, but here is an example of using an if loop to make sure that the information you're saying is particularly relevant to their donation history. Right, so tied to getting the link clicked on is also making sure you're asking for the right amount. If it's too high, they probably won't click through. If it's too low, they might do, and they may even donate, but you potentially missed out on some much needed finances because you could have asked for more. So the perfect amount is difficult to find. It's going to vary from one donor to another, but we're going to look at some of the tricks on how you can make sure that the amount you are asking for is dynamically tailored to that donor. And then finally from me, you're going to want to get through to the website and actually click donate. So we've recently released express payment options. Lovely example of this on the right. We're not going to be talking about that too much today. Again, lots of resources on that. But this is yet another way that you can make it quicker and easier for your donors to donate with just 2 button clicks. Brian and Dana will also be sharing some tricks on how to make sure the ask amount is pulled through to the page and how to make sure that the website experience is smooth and maximizing any potential income and ultimately giving a personalized experience. Okay, I'm going to drink some water and pass you over to Dana.
Awesome. Thank you, Ollie. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And pick up where Ollie just left off. So I think a lot of things that Ollie just touched on as far as tactics that should be used by pretty much anyone who's asking donations, as far as personalizing the ask, making sure that people are recognized for the way that they've engaged with the organization historically. All of those things are things that can be made like pretty easily done in NationBuilder emails using the data that's available about your supporters in your database. So that's what we're going to focus on over the next few examples. So as Ollie mentioned, some of this will be reminiscent of the last webinar, but very tailored to fundraising language specifically in ways that this can be employed in those emails. So touching on the if-else statement that Ollie was just speaking to, but just in case anyone wasn't on that call or if anyone needs a refresher, because I think a lot of times with things like this, you might see it and you'll be like, oh, that's really cool. And then you know that the documentation is in your back pocket, and then you join this and you're like, I did not review that before I joined this webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and just touch on what that is again. So if-else statements, they're not specific to NationBuilder, and they're not specific to even Liquid, the language that we're using here. These are something that show up time and time again in all sorts of different programming languages, but it's essentially a true or false statement if somebody's profile meets certain criteria. So does this person have this tag? If so, show them this content. If someone doesn't have the tag, they see something else. The same can be said for different elements of someone's profile. So if someone's a member, they see this content versus someone who's not. If someone's a donor, they see this content versus somebody who's not. So this is very customizable. Brian actually later in the presentation is going to show you just even one resource that we have of several of different pieces that you can look at on someone's profile and build these like true, false, if else statements. So we can use them in the body of email to display content dynamically, depending on whether or not a statement is true or false. If someone has a tag, if a profile has a certain variable or like a certain field filled out in a certain way. And the reason that this type of conditional logic or this like true false statement is really helpful is that one, you can send many different, like very targeted, very specific emails to a huge swath of people without necessarily having to break it out into like 3 or 5 different email blasts. So it saves you some time during what is one of the busiest times of the year for sending out email. Like at the end of the year, I know it's like you're trying to send out a bunch of donation asks and you're trying to send emails that don't have a donation ask. So it's like they're still engaging with you in some way that's not around money. So you're in a constant battle against like trying to keep the content calendar full and trying to keep people interested and trying to get as much money in the door by the end of the year as you can. So this can make it a lot easier. Like build out a template that you repurpose and just change out the content that's going to each type of group. Depending on how they've engaged, depending on the tags or if they're a member or if they're a donor or not. It also prevents you from having to build a bunch of custom lists or again, like segmenting out people in that way and tying them to email blasts and then potentially running into like an issue of human error of like sending somebody 2 versions of the same email because we are all human. I've done this. Everyone's done this, I think, at some point. So if everyone is on the same email, the worst case scenario is someone has like the wrong tag and they just get a different version of the email, but they don't get like 2 of the same email twice. I don't know if anyone on here has ever done this with retailers do this sometimes. I've even been like subscribed to other organizations where I get an A/B tested email, but I get both versions of the A/B test, and I can see that like I got both subject lines, but the content of the email is the same. And I'm like, well, that person might not have been paying attention, or I ended up on 2 lists somehow, or whatever. And then finally, if you're sending one email and it's a mix of like your donors who are your most your most engaged people, and then people who have never donated and are trying to, mixing those people into the same email blast is going to do nothing but increase your deliverability rate because it's going to have more opens because your donors are getting the same email as your non-donors. So by mixing the audiences together versus segmenting them out, it's probably going to help your deliverability and land you in more inboxes, as Ollie mentioned. So I'm going to go through a couple of examples really quickly. So one example of using if statements with tags or with field values is addressing people properly. So this is a case where at the end of the year, you're going to be doing a lot of thanking for things that people did, and you want to thank them for like however they engaged. So you might have members and donors and supporters, and those might be 3 different groups of people, or you might have just donors and supporters. But in this case, in this example, what I'm showing you is on the right-hand side, I'm saying if the recipient of the email, so that's the syntax here, if the recipient is a member, then they see a thank you that's specific to members. Otherwise, everyone else gets an email that says, or that's a thank you to friends. So, we're doing incredibly well because of friends like you, supporters like you, what have you. But that way members are being called out specifically without having to take all your members, put them into a different email blast and reach out to them entirely separately than everyone else in your database. Same goes with donors. This can also be done with a tag. This example is looking at a flag on the profile, like do they have a membership or not? But obviously if you represent that information any other way, like a tag, then we can pick that up too. Another example of this is making a targeted donation ask that's intended to move someone along a ladder of engagement, again, without having to break it out into 3 separate emails. So in this case, we are using a tag. So in the liquid example that I have here, I know this is kind of small, but if anyone received the follow-up document that Ollie shared after after the first one, which we'll probably link to in the follow-up for this as well, there are a million examples of this. So if you're trying to squint and you have bad eyesight like I do, then don't worry. We'll follow up with all the documentation that you need. But what we're looking at here is 3 different cases, like 3 different examples of what someone might receive in this email. That's a donation solicitation, but housed in a single email. So we're taking a look at, is this individual a one-time donor, which we're determining via tag. So you might run some filters, apply the tags, then set this email up and send it. And we're saying, thank you for your last donation amount. So we're referencing the fact that they've donated previously. We're talking about how that donation was used. And then we're trying to encourage them to become a recurring donor. We also have a tag for recurring donor. And maybe what we're going to do is summarize their donations year to date. And I'm just throwing in standard smart fields here, but again, just to further tailor the experience. And maybe this doesn't have an ask, but maybe the ask here is, reach out to your friends. Here's a recruiter link. See if they're willing to donate. Maybe fundraise on our behalf. Maybe increase your monthly donation. Maybe make a supplementary one-time donation, whatever it is. And then finally, this last message will be given to anyone who has neither of these tags, recurring or one-time. So this is somebody who has likely never donated. And we're asking them for a fairly low-level donation, so $10. So again, all of these experiences are tailored to try to push people along just to whatever the next step of the engagement is for donations to your organization. So if I go to this next slide, this is a piece that we're going to touch on again later in an even more customized way. But one thing that is really helpful in emails like this, and especially at Giving Tuesday time when you have goals to hit, or like end of year time when you have goals to hit, is pre-populating the donation amount, like making a suggested donation amount that carries through to the donation page. And this is like a fun trick that I think a lot of people know about NationBuilder, and a lot of people don't know. So at the end of a URL, and if anyone on this call is familiar with how recruiter links work, it's the exact same thing. So if I send a link, if I do a social share prompt, I post a link and then Ollie goes to that page and signs up, I'm attributed to Ollie as the recruiter. And that's because my unique NationBuilder recruiter ID was appended to the end of that link. You can use the exact same formatting, this question mark amount equals, and then add a value here to the end of a donation URL, or a URL to a donation page. And it will actually take whatever's after that equal sign and pre-populate that as the other amount on the donation form. So I'm actually going to show you how that works end to end. But I want to call that out here because we are going to pull it into another slide later. So in the case of someone having never made a gift, we're suggesting that they make a $10 gift in the button. They click that, and then because the button is the URL associated with the button is appended with this little snippet. When they land on the donation page, $10 will already be pre-populated in the donation amount, and they can go ahead and just fill out their information and process the donation. So with that, I am going to kick it over to Brian to talk us through for loops.
Yeah, okay. So for loops can be used, for loops and calculations done within those loops can be used both on the website and emails here. And it's kind of taking it a step more advanced. The idea is that the way that the data is structured in your NationBuilder people database includes objects that might have arrays of other objects within them. So for example, you might have a person profile that has many different donations associated with that. And you can use Liquid to loop through or cycle through those objects and either print something out. So maybe you want to print out all of their donations in line by line, or you can even use calculations to add things up. So for a for loop, we can print out a recipient's donation history for all time. We can include if-then statements to scope it only to a specific year or a specific tracking code or tender type. And then in addition, we could run calculations. So for each iteration of the loop, maybe we're printing out the line that shows the amount and the date, but maybe we're also adding that total amount to a variable that we create that we could then print out at the end and say, okay, in this calendar year, this is how much you've donated, or this is the average amount, because we know how many donations were included. We can do math in Liquid there. So calculations in Liquid operators give you the ability to customize the amount based on someone's giving history, because we can do those calculations and then use that variable to include in the spot that Dana had just alluded to in the suggested amount. So per the slides here, we don't have to run different filters and send out 5 different emails with different amounts in each one. And every person that opens the same email blast sees a different customized ask to them. And then the last bullet here, we've had a lot of customers that have found this really useful, and being able to send out an end of year kind of record of all of your donations for the whole year. Okay, so we can go on to the next one. So this is an example on the left here of an if-else statement is, and this might be a bit of what we've gone over before, but if a recipient is a donor, we place something in there. If they've never donated, that is going to return false. And so you can put in the else section whatever you might want to do, like it's time to give your first donation, or would you consider donating? On the right side, we're including now a for loop. And so again, we're cycling through, and we start the for loop with for, and then whatever object name we want to use in, and then where the array of the objects is. So in this case, because it's in an email, it starts with recipient dot, and then the more specific object, which is donations. So in this example, the donation after the word for could be any word, but we want to make sure that then the next line down starts with that word. And then, so we're saying for amount, and we're putting in there the object name and then the specific variable of that object. In this case, it's amount format, but we could also add another one in there that's amount succeeded at, which would print out the date of the transaction. And then we close it up with end for, so that it keeps looping through that. And then at the bottom, you can see how that would show up if the person had 3 different donations. All right, so here we have an example of actually in the email editor, and I'm going to outline on the right side the Liquid code that's going on and what the logic is here. So we start our for loop donation, and then this is where we're going to add in the calculation. So we want to assign the year number, which is a new variable that we've made up, as whatever the donations succeeded at date is, but specifically just the year. And so in the documentation that we'll share, it includes the different syntax that you can use for a date like this. For the year, it's just the %sign Y. And then we add what's called a filter at the end to multiply it by 1, so that this variable that we've created is a number. Well, this is not super intuitive. It is outlined more in the documentation. And sometimes it just takes a bit of playing around with to get there. And then what we're going to do is we want to also get the value of the donation. So we take the amount in cents and make it into a number by multiplying it by 1. And then we're still in the for loop. So this is for each donation that we're going through, that we're looping through. If the year number is 21, then we want to print out these actual variables. And those are in the double brackets. That's actually going to be rendered for each time we loop through it. So we'll say the donation amount and the amount format. So you see $10 here on the left, and the transaction date. And we've chosen a different date format here. And then this is an important part here. We're also assigning the donation sum as whatever that variable currently is when it's looping through this iteration, plus the donation value of this particular donation. So then when it gets to the next one, the first time maybe it's set to $10. Then when it gets to the next one, when you add the $75. If we were to print out at the very end of this the donation sum, we could say that the total is $85. So this kind of goes a bit more into that. So again, we're setting a new variable at the top here as 0 so that it's a number. And same with the donation sum, the count, and the average. So in this case, we want to actually return the average donation amount at the end. So what we want to do is get the sum of all of the donations, however many donations there are, and then just do a division math in there. So we're going to loop through with this for loop here, all of the donations, and we're going to assign the donation value to the amount. The sum is the amount there, and the count is whatever we had the count set at previously plus 1. So we're just kind of adding 1 each time it loops through. So then by the time it gets through all of the donations, it'll have added all 3 of these variables up, and we can take the sum and divide it by 100 to get the donation total, because we were adding up the amount in cents. And then donation cents is the sum. Dana, can you remind me what you're doing here? The slice? I think
Oh.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, good. It's a lot of the pieces that you're seeing are the formatting of the numbers. So I think this is just to make sure that the cents are populating. But I mean,
Right.
I also just want to call out, like, we're going through all of this just to make sure that you understand in this webinar, but we'll provide documentation that you can try copying and pasting into your own editor and playing around with this in a way that won't require you to like necessarily go through each step.
Totally.
Here.
So the idea is that at the end, we're able to get the average donation amount, and using all of these different math filters, you could, round up to something, or you could get the maximum donation amount. There's a lot that you can do here, but if you know what the thing is that you want to include in the email, you could use Liquid to get there. So we can go on to the next one. I'll pass it over to you, Dana, for this.
Cool. Yeah, I'll take it back for a second, and then Brian's going to go over some cool stuff on websites. So one piece that I know we have alluded to a lot, and I think is really powerful, is calculating a custom donation ask depending on someone's giving history in the past. So you can use different elements or calculations to determine what that ask amount should be. So one thing that Brian just walked you through is the process of cycling through someone's donations to add up the total amount and then divide that by the number of donations to grab the average amount that someone typically gives, which we could then use to say, maybe that's the ask amount that we want to put in front of people. Maybe we want to take their average ask and like add 50% onto it and try to bump up their average donation ask. But as I think even like Ollie has gone through this process with a customer recently and noticed that like if you start pulling averages together, then like you might end up with the weird example that we had of like you're asking someone for $87 and you're like, well, that's wonderful, but I should have just asked them for 100 or any flat number other than kind of like these wonky dynamic things. So one safer bet, and one that I think is a little bit easier to digest too, in terms of like kind of a low hanging fruit that you can try this giving season without having to dig way into Liquid if some of this seems a little overwhelming, is by using someone's last donation amount and trying to bump that up for the next donation ask. So on the right side, I just have a basic, you'll notice I keep referencing Craft Club. This is my demo nation. And if you want to take a fake course on learning how to knit that I put together and answer survey questions based off of it, then I've like recreated an LMS experience in NationBuilder doing that. But this is my demo nation. So I'm just saying thank you for your support of our organization with donations like yours, all that good stuff. Tell them where it's going, why it's important. Your last donation was, and then I'm using the smart field of last donation amount to pull that amount in. So your last donation amount was $10, which we used to develop our new course. now we're excited to start working on our next course. And then I have a little liquid snippet here. So very similar to what Brian was, actually exact same thing as what Brian had just referenced. We don't have a smart field or even a variable on someone's profile that we can pull from that says, hey, what was someone's last donation amount, like at plus 50% or increased by 50%. So we have to create one. So we are using assign custom donation ask, which is creating a variable called custom donation ask. And it's kind of just like a container that we can then run a calculation and store the value of that calculation in so we can reference it later. So we're saying assign custom donation ask equals, and then pulling in their last donation amount, multiplying it. Normally you'd multiply it by 1.5, but of course, as Brian mentioned, the total donation amounts that we store, thanks to some like wonky NationBuilder stuff, are all in cents. So you have to divide everything by 100 to have it show in dollars. So we're multiplying it by 0.015, which will give us the 150% of the last donation amount in dollars. And then we're just rounding it. So if there were any cents, we're cutting them off. And then now that we've done that calculation, we can now reference it in the body of the email. So will you contribute, and then pulling in custom donation ask, which will in turn display the increased like custom amount that we've just calculated. And I'm also pulling it into the text in the button. So you can see it's saying, will you contribute $15? That $15 isn't stored anywhere in my profile. That's literally just coming from the math that we did on this $10 donation right here. It's also showing in the value of the button. And so what I'm going to do before we, wrap up these slides is I'm actually going to jump into the page. Bear with me while I maneuver the Zoom window around. So you can see this is exactly what we just looked at, but I just want to show you what this looks like in the button here. So in the button text, I'm just pulling in, let me zoom in a couple times. I'm just pulling in double brackets that custom donation ask variable that we created, storing our 150% of the last donation amount. And then at the very end of the URL that our button is linked to, I have that little snippet that we talked about before. So I have my donation link, and then I have the question mark, amount equals, and then between the double brackets, I have custom donation ask. So in the prior slide that I referenced this in, I had the number 10 here, which would carry through as $10 to the donation page. Instead, this is actually going to be totally dependent on whatever the calculation is for that recipient of the email. So if, you know, Ollie's last donation was $5, this would be $7.50. Well, I guess we're rounding it, so it would be $8. So this would be totally custom depending on who's getting the email. So if I click on this link, it's going to bring me to the donation page. And you can see $15 is highlighted right here. So that is kind of what the experience looks like. And you could do that with any of the calculations that you might do if you were to take the more advanced approach that Brian had just walked through too. So if you did want to try this with like someone's average donation amount, see what kind of weird donations come in the door, but might be worth it if you think that that reflects a more aspirational donation ask. Now's the time. So yeah, you can do the same thing, but the carrying through to the donation page is definitely a cool trick if you haven't done it before, especially if you're making a recommendation for a donation amount. So with that said, I'm going to jump back in here, present, and I'm going to hand it back over to Brian to talk about examples in websites.
Cool. Yeah, so just like we've seen how Liquid is able to tie together data from the people database with the emails that are going out, you can also use the same programming language, which is Liquid, to connect data from the people database and sign up profiles to the website experience that they see when they are browsing the website. And the best part about kind of using a NationBuilder website is that your site can be truly dynamic and catered to the logged in user, as opposed to using, an external website, which might look more static. So the first thing to note here that's different from email is that with email, you are sending it out to recipients that you have profiles for already. So it's going to know which profile to pull from. Whereas on the website, somebody might be, just visiting your website and they are not in your database at all, or we don't know which profile they are and they're fully logged out, or they might be logged in and we kind of know who they are, so we can render those fields. So there are different states. So there's logged out, which is, either somebody doesn't exist in the database or they just came to your site. There's logged in, which means they've punched in their email and password, or they've used, Facebook, Twitter, single sign-on, something like that to log in. And then there's this in-between state, which is in the code, it's called sorta logged in. And the idea there is we're pretty sure we know who is visiting the site because we've matched it with a profile in the database based on the email that they entered when they took action, or they clicked on an email link and it took them to the website, and the link is personalized to show us what profile they are, but they haven't securely logged in with a password or something like Facebook or Twitter. So we're not 100% guaranteed that that is the person. We might not want to display sensitive information. So the screenshot here shows what a single profile page might look like for somebody totally logged out on the left versus when they're logged in on the right, looking at their own profile. There's some more sensitive information that they can see about their own profile. So if we want to click to the next one. So in terms of personalization, we can do personalization on any aspect of the website, any of the pages, the home page, the top navigation bar, which you'll often see a sign in button if you're logged out, or a view my profile button if you're logged in. The most common area of personalization for websites is in the public profiles. So things that we can add are user badges. This is a public profile here where somebody has these two badges, took the pledge and recruiter, based on things that we know about their profile. And the way that we render that is using the liquid here on the bottom left, where we're looking at if the profile tag list contains this tag name, then we just put in our HTML code to render that badge. And similarly, we can look at field values. So if the profile recruits count is greater than 0, then let's display that badge and even include the count next to the badge name there. So another thing that we can do to personalize public profiles or settings is display, let's say, membership information. So this group wanted to display to users when they log in. They want them to know when their membership expires. Is it active? Was it started? And if it's about to expire, maybe a link to renew the membership or even upgrade to a different level of membership. So that's something that you could add in, and that's done. I have the code here that I use for that, which was we're actually looping through their membership objects just in case they have multiple, and then displaying all of these different variables here. So a couple more things that we can do to customize profiles or just the website in general. So we can display giving history. So much like what we were doing with the emails, is I've done a for loop here that shows a table of all the donations. There's suggested call to actions. So I have an advocate checklist that is showing different actions that an advocate could take. And then based on whether or not they either have a certain tag or a certain value and their profile is true, I'm just displaying a checked icon or an unchecked icon next to it. And all of those potential tasks are linked to pages that would let you do that thing. And then lastly, recruiter links. So on this public profile that we're looking at here, we saw that even if somebody who's not me is viewing my public profile, there's links for donate and join at the bottom. And those are actually, they have recruiter links appended to the end of them with the profile ID on here. So if I share out my profile and my friend clicks donate, it's using my recruiter ID so that when we see that donation pop into the database, it's showing that I recruited it. And I think if we click next, this is the, we'll send out the deck here, but this is basically the code that made up that entire section. So I'm actually looking at if the person is logged in this case, sort of logged in, and if the profile that they're logged in as is the same ID as the profile that they're viewing. Meaning, are you the person whose profile you're looking at? If so, we're displaying this advocate checklist. We're displaying the giving history only if they're a donor. We're looping through all the donations and making a table there. And then at the very bottom, the last 2 lines are just links to the donate and the join page, but with the recruiter ID appended there, showing the ID of the profile that you're looking at. And then the last thing that I'll leave you with on this is just generally when I'm building out solutions like this and I'm thinking through what's possible or what I could do, I often reference our liquid documentation on our website. Whenever I even start to type in sign up on my browser, it defaults to this because I view this page so much. And it's just all of the different variables that exist. In this case, on a sign up variable, on the left is all the different objects that you could use. And I'm going to post in the chat 3 different links, one of which is this page, but just that outline all of the different resources that we have for liquid documentation. And Ollie, I'll pass it back to you.
Nice, thank you. I very boldly put conclusion on the slide. It's less of a conclusion and more just like things to bear in mind as you're doing it. So I think, yeah, we've obviously seen, a number of examples, and I'm sure there's going to be some questions in a minute, but just to tie things off, I just wanted to kind of add a few things that is really worth bearing in mind when trying to build out these examples. So the first thing to say, which Dana hit upon, is that, personalization and building these out is definitely an investment. It will take you longer than sending a standard, straightforward static email. It will, but it will also yield better results. And I think the real value is you're going to get in the longer term. So when you built them out once, you can pick them up, you can review the results, you can improve on them next time, and you're not going to have to start from scratch. So whilst it might feel like you've spent a long time building something out, and the good news, as we mentioned, is, we, and by we, I mean really Brian has built these already, and we will share them out. But, crucially, you will be able to, when you have them in your broadcaster, in your website, in your sandboxes, whatever it is, you're going to be able to use them over and over again. And so to that point as well, make sure you do, when you're doing it, when you're sending emails out to donors, when you're, trying these different things, make sure you take full records of what you did, what you tried, what worked really well, what didn't work so well. I know that for a lot of organizations, big fundraising pushes are things that happen once a year. This time next year, you might have had staff turnover, you might have had significant growth, you might be in a very different place. So you're going to want to make sure you can look back on where you were and what you did, and then what you can then replicate and ideally improve. And obviously with NationBuilder, you can get the statistics, you can get the filters, you can get some of the reporting that you need to do that. And of course, we've shown you a lot here, and there's obviously even more that you can do, but we've just touched on some of it. I think it's crucial that whatever you do, and it's always worth bearing in mind, fits into your wider strategy. You're not going to necessarily be able to do all of it, and there are lots of ways to go. But it has to fit in with your strategy, whether that's your comms, brand, engagement strategy, and whatever works needs to make sense. There might be things that you've seen that look cool for one organization, but they just might not make sense for another. And so your targeting, your personalization, your ask, they all need to be considered on that. And then finally, please don't forget to test what you're building. I'm sure you won't, but sometimes people don't. And I covered it in the last webinar on personalization. There's a lot of ways you can do it. It's so important. You have the tools to do it, whether that's, adjusting values in your own record that you're logged in as, using test emails or records, and, logging in with different test records as well. And then I know I said finally, but we're all learning at this. There are always novel, original ideas that are being tried out. So if you have something cool that you've built, please do let us know. We're always interested to hear it. And then equally, if you use some of the tactics we talked about today in your end of year push and they work really well, then please share those with us, because we'd love to hear what works or what doesn't work. Cool. So that gives us 7 minutes or so for questions, which I don't know if it'll be enough or not, but yeah, any questions?
I do have a quick question, and thanks to all three of you for this great information. I'm a little overwhelmed, but like in a really good way. So I think, Ollie, a point that you made earlier on, or it might have been you, Dana, is that it's better to have a bigger list, helps our deliverability. Something that we've been doing is we usually split our donation fundraising emails by like donor and non-donor, because we also really like having the data that we get from seeing like previous donors donated at this rate compared to non-donors. So I'm just wondering, like, I hear that as like a cost benefit, and I'm curious just if you have anything else to add on like weighing that out.
Yeah, sure. I think it's so specific because it really depends on your deliverability in like your history with that. I think some people have a really contentious relationship with getting email into inboxes, and that's a constant struggle. Other group, you're definitely not alone. I think in customers that I work with and customers that Ollie works with, and as far as like groups that split out your donation solicitations by past giving history or lack thereof. I will say that it takes some additional steps, but you can go in and like get a sense through filters who got the email and who donated as a result, or like if you are looking at if you're directing people to a specific page for a specific campaign, and so you can like tie that behavior together, then you can at least backtrack your way into that data. I know it adds steps versus like just seeing the outright like open rates, click rates, donations that came in through that specific email. But if you are finding that you're struggling with deliverability, then mixing the two groups together can help. Oftentimes I'll do that with like, if a customer has a group of people that they are not engaged with at all. Like I know if you've worked with Ollie in the past, then like you're probably no stranger to the idea of like reconfirmation campaigns and like kind of making sure that people are engaged. I've even done that too, where like outside of all donation asks in general, I've had some customers send like their regular update and then group in some of the people that aren't engaged with the email into that email thread, like just as a subgroup. And literally using Liquid, they're getting an entirely different message that's saying like, do you still want to receive email from us? Only because mixing the groups together versus sending an email just to people who aren't engaged gets better deliverability. So it's a science that has no good answer. I feel like it's all just testing, but it might be worth like trying it with a small group of donors and non-donors and seeing if the deliverability rates are any better than what you see. Of course, I'm sure if you're sending to just donors too, then like you're probably getting fine deliverability as is in some of those segments. So I don't know if that answered your question or if I just like rambled on for a few minutes, but those are my thoughts on it.
Yeah, thank you.
Simone, to your question in the chat about deliverability basics, we definitely do. We can make sure to include those in the follow-up as well. We've got some guides and support docs, and I think also Lena did a webinar last year, so that'd be worth watching.
This might be a little off topic, but in the Liquid, I'm pretty sure you said that you can do like average donation over a time period, right? Between date X and date Y. I'm pretty sure that's something you can't do just from the filters.
Right.
So is there any way to, because I'm actually pulling data out, doing some of that kind of analysis in a spreadsheet and then importing tags back in, because I'm interested in, like, we have people that are on a recurring donation, but then people might give $200 every 2 months or something. And to us, that's as valuable as somebody gives $25 a month on an official recurring donation. So I'm wondering if there's any way to use the ability to do that kind of analysis and then in an easy way bring that back into the database so that I can see it. I don't know if that's.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is, rather than necessarily doing the calculation and then using it in the email itself, being able to kind of include that back into the profile in the people database.
Yeah, it's for my filtering. Yeah.
I think so. So Liquid itself is not going to work just like when stored in a field in the database. So I think, unfortunately, the best way right now, unless, and this is just off the top of my head, would probably be doing some sort of export and calculation like you're doing now. There are ways that it could be automated if you wanted to. So for example, whenever there's a new donation, you could have a Zapier setup that like requests all these variables and does the calculation and then writes back to your custom field that you're storing it in. But that's the, if we were to want to render that average within a time period on, the website or an email, we could use Liquid, but not within the control panel.
Yeah, I think, Ben, probably the way that you're doing it now is like taking it a step further beyond just someone's like generic history of like the amount that you've donated or the number of number of times you've donated between two dates. Those things are, as you know, surfaceable via filters. I think if you're taking it a step further than that, then probably the work that you're doing outside of NationBuilder and then bringing it back in as a tag or like putting them into some bucket for a certain type of solicitation at end of year or just in general, then that's probably the best way outside of what Brian just mentioned, even though I know it's a couple of extra steps.
No, I appreciate it. And I'm using Zapier to bring it out. If you can use Zapier to bring it back in without having to do an import, I'd love to hear more about that. I know this is a little bit off topic, so I don't want to take away from
Yeah. I'll shoot you an email because there's a way to leverage Zapier that goes beyond just the actions and triggers that we have in our own Zapier app.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
Cool. Well, I think we're at time. But if any burning questions come through, then you've got my email and I can either respond or loop one of Brian and Dana in. And as we mentioned, we'll be following up with the recording of this, but B, which hopefully might be helpful to take things at a slower pace, possibly, but also kind of some of the like source code and like actual things that we demoed, so you can copy and paste them into your nations and play around with them and use them for the end of year fundraising. So thanks everyone for joining and good luck, and we'll see you soon.